Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of literature's biggest cold cases: what really killed William Shakespeare. Okay, so here's what we know for sure. William Shakespeare died on April 23rd, 1616. He was only 52, and he was buried right in his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. But here's the thing. That's where the facts run out. No official cause of death was ever written down. And that's where our investigation really begins, as we dive into the top theories. For hundreds of years, there's been one story that everyone seems to love to tell, and it paints a pretty wild picture of Shakespeare's final night. This right here is the most famous account. It comes from the diary of a local vicar, a guy named John Ward. He wrote that Shakespeare had a, quote, merry meeting with his writer buddies, drank too hard, and then died from a fever he got that night. Basically, the legend is that he literally partied himself to death. But, and this is a big but, there's a huge catch. Ward wrote this in his diary almost 50 years after Shakespeare was already dead. So you have to wonder, is this actual history, or is it just some really old town gossip? It's a great story, but is it true? So modern investigators have started to look past that legend and toward the medical science of the time. And they've uncovered some really plausible and very different theories. Looking back at all the evidence, or, the lack of it, experts have pretty much zeroed in on three main medical suspects: typhus, syphilis, and cancer. Now, this is where that old diary story gets really interesting again. See, there was an infectious disease going around called typhus, and its nickname back then was the new fever. And guess what? Records show a new strain was spreading all over England right in 1616. So what if the fever the vicar wrote about wasn't from a hangover at all, but from this deadly illness? It suddenly makes the old stories seem plausible, but in a totally new way. Okay, next up is the syphilis theory. And this one is all about playing historical detective. The clue? Shakespeare's signatures on his will and other documents are famously shaky. The theory goes that this wasn't just bad handwriting. It could have been tremors from mercury poisoning, and mercury was the toxic, brutal treatment they used for syphilis at the time. As they used to say, a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. And finally, there's a theory that points to a much slower illness. Some German researchers studied what's believed to be Shakespeare's death mask, and they compared it to a bust of him made while he was still alive. Their conclusion? They say they found evidence of a large cancerous tumor growing right over his left eye, which they think was the real cause of his death. So, after all the legends, the gossip, and the modern medical detective work, where does that all leave us? The honest truth is we just don't know for sure. There are no medical records, his body has never been exhumed, and all we have is circumstantial evidence. Every theory has these fascinating clues, but none of them have that final, conclusive proof. The death of William Shakespeare is still one of history's great unsolved mysteries. Maybe the mystery is the perfect final act for a writer who understood life and death better than almost anyone. It really leaves us with a final question to think about. Does it really matter how he died? Would knowing the truth, whether it was a drunken night out, a terrible disease, or a long illness, actually change how we see the man and his timeless, incredible work?